Welcome to the Disruptance Podcast. The Disruptance Podcast is the show that disrupts the way entrepreneurs think to make them more profitable and impactful. Rethink tired and outdated business norms to welcome innovation and unlock your unlimited possibilities. Here are your hosts, Forney and Greg Fowler.
So, Eric, we got another episode here going on, and I'd love to dive into this topic because kind of basing it off of what our good old friend Napoleon Hill has put together. For anybody who doesn't know.
I have a confession to make.
Oh, yeah, do it. Let's do it.
Napoleon Hill, like a really popular author?
You know, it could be, or some people might confuse him with a more recent film that was done where it was this really awkwardly cool guy dancing on a stage.
Napoleon Dynamite. That's what I was really hoping that we were talking about today, Greg. I feel like I'm an expert on Napoleon Dynamite, but I have not read anything from Napoleon Hill. That's my confession.
There you go. So you are one of the very few on the planet because, you know, one of the finest books that was ever put together, as most people would state, is Think and Grow Rich. I think that's his most popular book. Yeah. Over 70 million copies sold since 1937. I don't know how many books he's written. Every time his name comes up, it's always, taking perspective and knowledge from others and transcending it into professionals and businesses and entrepreneurs. So, stamp of approval on my end. But today, Eric, is really the thought based off of what Napoleon's law of success or laws of success would be. So the book,
I get to be both a podcast host and a listener and learner at the same time. This is going to be fun for me because I don't know the 17 laws. So now I'm going to be a part of the active engagement here. All right.
This is good, Eric. And again, you and I, as always, we're learning together. We're sharing together. Everybody out there, you're welcome. Thank you for tuning in, but you're also welcome simultaneously. So this book, it was published back in 1928. And essentially, it is what it stated kind of earlier in Napoleon Hill fashion and style. He personally interviewed and or garnered information from over 500 top performers in various industries, right? So it wasn't one specific, and distilled that knowledge of all those conversations from top performers down to these laws of success. And I guess, Eric, I want your thought process and perspective, and everybody tuning in with us to follow along and get their thoughts too, is do these principles from 1928 still hold up today in 2023?
Okay. What I heard you say is he's basically like the 20s version of Dave Ramsey. He talks to successful people, and he wrote a book about building wealth. Okay, got it. So 1920s, Dave Ramsey, here we go.
Maybe a little bit more hair than Dave Ramsey, but other than that, same thing. So let's go down the line here, and I'm gonna rattle these off. Kind of basing it off the screen. So the first principle is definitiveness of purpose. Now that might confuse some people. Kind of confused me as we're looking at and based out what is definitiveness of purpose. To my understand, Eric, and I want your thoughts on it. Having a definition really specific to what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're doing it. Really defining and distilling that down for yourself to have clarity to take action and be consistent. I don't know what your thoughts on that law, definitiveness of purpose, and maybe what Napoleon Hill meant by that.
Well, I already disagree with Dave Ramsey on this one. And the reason being is because there is no purpose.
So there we go.
Here's my
strike one.
Here's my thought: is this is my nihilistic perspective here, right? Is that that we can choose things to be passionate about, but at the end of the day, the purpose of life is to contribute to the greater good of society, to the greater good of the community, and those that we surround ourselves with. How we then choose to apply that contribution becomes one of the things that either is a combination of what we're passionate about or what we're skilled at. And not everyone has the ability to have the intersect or the opportunity to intersect both skills and passion. And so I love the idea of selling books by selling purpose. However, at the end of the day, it's both the intersection of something that I'm skilled at and something that I'm passionate about. It's terrible advice, though, for anyone under the age of 30 who doesn't want to be eating ramen noodles for the rest of their life. What they should do instead is initiate first by dating as many jobs as possible or dating as many opportunities as possible to figure out what they're actually skilled at and what they can get out of bed and go find meaning in doing.
I think that's excellent advice going down to it. And I would say strike one to Napoleon Hill on that. And not that we're debunking any of this, but I think ultimately, right. That was a long time ago. I think that there are core principles and foundational aspects of being a business owner, entrepreneur, or real estate professional that do hold true. But some things have to be brought to relevance and nature here into 2023. I
expect most people would not agree with me either, by the way. I don't think that most people have that perspective that that purpose is already predetermined. Most people likely set out for that purpose-based goal. I think, however, it's a super white-collar first world approach to tackling business. I had purpose while selling paint, while talking on radio and television, and purpose while working in real estate. So purpose is, and to me, super cute for writing copies and books, but is too abstract to be meaningful.
Hey, I love it, Eric. The title and or name of the show is Disruptance for a reason. So let's keep doing that going down the line. So number 2 is when you talk about mastermind alliance. So what comes to my head into when somebody bases off a mastermind or aligning with people is really surrounding yourself with like-minded individuals and or people who are much further in standpoint to where you want to go to learn and garner information from. What are your thoughts on mastermind alliance and maybe what Napoleon meant by that?
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to side with Napoleon Dynamite on this one, just like Kip and Uncle Rico. I think this one stands the test of time. Who you surround yourself with does make a difference. And the thought process is that your goal is to try to surround yourself with people who are thinking in a different way than you, in both ways that challenge the way you think from a personal perspective, from a professional standpoint, even from like a political or socio-economic standpoint, is that the goal is to gather perspectives from as wide of a swath as possible and then choose what your own perception is after gathering perspective. And the only way to do that is to aggregate a diverse set of perspectives, and ideally a diverse set of perspectives of people who you think you want to aspire to be more like, even if you opt to change your mind after learning more about their perspective.
I think that goes into the counter question that I think hopefully the audience is asking this. I'm going to ask for them. In your opinion, Eric, with that being a law of success is, surrounding yourself with greatness and really, garnering that information and applying it. How do you advise anybody tuning in to do that? Yeah. There's a lot of pushback into how do I get in the room? So how do I get a seat at the table? There's excuse after excuse.
Ton of easy ways to do this, Greg. Here's how this works. Several ways. I remember someone asked Gary Keller this question recently, and they said, Gary, you know what? You spend all this time and you pour into us and you teach us the wisdom that you've gathered through your years and success and life and business and parenting and marriage, and you openly share it with all of us. And so who pours into you? And I remember Gary's response was it was almost that moment where I was like, felt a little bit sorry for him. He paused and he thought, and he said, books.
Huh.
And so when you think about then if the fastest, easiest, accessible path for $0 for everyone on the planet is to gather a mastermind of intellectual perspectives about the world via books. Reading is good. It has been, it will be. And so reading other people's perspectives along the history of life, whether it's reading Abraham Lincoln, whether it's Buddha, whether it's Hitler, anyone who has a diverse series of perspectives could be someone that you could mastermind with in a one-way unilateral direction of relationship. Now, if I want to get in the room with other people, then I'm going to pick up the phone, I'm going to text, I'm going to DM something to the effect, something to get me a response. And I'm probably going to ask questions from a framework of curiosity. What I'm not going to do is ask to be a burden. So, one of the things I might ask is like, if I'm in that dialogue, or if I have the opportunity to get someone on the phone, is, hey, what project or what are you working on right now that you're most passionate about, Greg? Because what I want to know is I want to understand you and your perspective. It doesn't make sense for me to walk into a room that may be above my thinking or above my pay grade and talk about me. The number one thing I could do is to ask people questions about themselves. If I want to mastermind, I should attempt to listen as much as possible and be curious.
I think that's huge advice coming down to it. And again, just reiterating, it's not about us. I think that so many people, when they are really trying to make shifts and changes, they're always, kind of projecting or self-projecting. Look, it's not about us. We need to connect in a meaningful way, open up the opportunity door and that dialogued conversation, ask good questions, but tentatively listen. That's where it's going to actually get in there and sustain an ability to actually take action based off of that information. I think it's good going to the Gary Keller scenario with sad nature and books as the advice, kind of saturating it. When you're that high of a thought process, it's hard to kind of mastermind into that. No, I get it. But I would also say into that nature, the books align with podcasts. I mean, anybody who's tuning in to this, they're trying to consume information. So whether you're reading it, you're watching it, you're listening to it, if you're going to an event, just make sure that what you're putting into your mind is actually going to be the sound advice that you're looking for. And I know, Eric, this is a spicy topic for you. Is all the ill advice? All the ill advice that's out there, so many people just talking. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people listening to really bad advice.
So that's the reason why you want to get aggregated, diverse group of perspectives, and you can, and that's, I didn't say you would aggregate advice from Hitler because I thought that was a good strategy to understand and take action on. It's because if you want to understand perspectives, you need to have extremes of perspective in order to figure out what's a moderate or something of some semblance of moderate perspective. So when I'm trying to learn something, what I do is I typically look for the most vitriolic perspectives on the ends of the spectrum, and realize that, okay, that's the out of bounds line. These are the Looney Tunes on each side of the subject matter, and the truth is likely somewhere in the middle. And where on that middle line or where on that spectrum it is largely irrelevant. My goal is just to try to understand is where is the actual truth between the out of bounds lines between the flat earthers and the earth is round people, right? What is the middle line of truth?
No, I love it. Again, perspective and balance, and I think making each person question, not necessarily just following the status quo, to me is a big thing in addition. So let's go on to the next one here, which is from Napoleon Hill, thought process into going the extra mile. So people have said it time and time again, put in the extra work, show up first, be the last to leave. What are your thoughts when Napoleon Hill is mentioning this being a law of success, going the extra mile?
Yeah. For whatever reason, the Clayton Christensen, he's got a quote that comes to my mind. Clayton Christensen wrote a really good book, I believe called The Innovator's Dilemma. He used to teach a course at Harvard when he was still living. It was about disruptive innovation. And Clayton Christensen has just some amazing thought leadership and some just really fascinating and valuable lessons that he teaches. You can absorb a ton of content on YouTube from him. And one of his perspectives was that it's easier to hold your principles 100% than it is to hold them 98% of the time. And so when I think about this concept of going the extra mile, what comes to my mind then is that going the extra mile is a standard, a principle of your core belief system, which is you have a principle of how you expect people to interact with you and the level of service or work ethic or deliverable that you'll provide to someone who hires you or interacts with you, the experience that someone has with your brand. It's never a bad idea to provide the best experience possible.
Yeah. Well, I think when you talk about experiences, that's a massive differentiator. And again, we're talking about businesses, entrepreneurs, real estate professionals. That
right.
thought-
I mean, it's even in life. Like, when we interact off camera here, you still show up the same way. My experience with you doesn't change just because the little red light shows up on this camera, right? I mean,
absolutely not.
You show up and you're always, you're always in a positive, uplifting, high energy mood. That's your standard, right? That's like your principal belief system about how you conduct yourself. But to a large degree, that's going the extra mile, because most people would show up and be just whatever that wind and whim of the day is. And yet you've decided that your standard is to show up and deliver extra each day for whoever experiences and interacts with you on any given day.
But you set that as the standard or that principle, and I think you had mentioned it perfectly, how we treat our spouses, our children, our friends, family, colleagues, and clients. That goes into it. And I think we've all had the perfect example of going the extra mile on the receiving end. And think back to the way that made us all feel, right? For me in particular, I had to stay at the Ritz-Carlton, and for me, I felt this might seem really silly to anybody that's out there, but I captured content as I do, and suggested into, hey, this is a great spot, we've had a wonderful time. And I felt that when the Ritz-Carlton media platform responded to my posts, I felt special, even though it was probably a third party or somebody on staff that is trained to respond to everybody this way. As a consumer, I felt like I was heard and responded to, respected, validated for doing these things. And it always put that extra. They didn't have to do that. They didn't have to respond to a single thing. So if you were at a restaurant, if you were at a car dealership, anything that you were doing that somebody went and took that extra step, remember how that made you feel. I think that goes a long way to be successful. The way we treat people, going that extra mile, there's a lot there, in my opinion.
The Ritz-Carlton Joshie the giraffe story. That is the best Ritz-Carlton story I know of. I've not.
Yeah, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
Oh, I don't know that I get it. I don't know that I'll get it 100% right, but essentially, I think there was like a 4-year-old, 3-year-old, some toddler about the age of one of our two kids, and they left a stuffed animal behind at Ritz-Carlton.
Oh.
And they got on a plane, flew home, and were long since gone. And they realized that the daughter realized that she'd left Joshie the giraffe behind, and the hotel staff found Joshie the giraffe, and they went on and then took pictures every day of Joshie the giraffe on adventures around the hotel and around the grounds of the hotel, and they would send photos of Joshie the giraffe on vacation while the family was conducting the rest of their vacation, and they would send them to the toddler, and then they of course sent Joshie the giraffe home after Joshie's vacation was completed. What did it take to do that? Very little, right? It was a little bit of creativity and a little bit of extra mile. And as you know, Greg, as a parent of a young kid, the impact that likely made on the family and on the toddler was exponential.
Huge. It'll never be forgotten. What an excellent example. And again, this is not a plug for Ritz-Carlton. There's lots of great, hotels,
Yeah.
resorts that are out there. And that, to the case in point, some people would justify paying a premium for a bed and a place to clean up and rest, right? So I think that goes into the equation of success into life, into business, is really, how can I go the extra mile? What can I do that's going to separate myself from the people that are said competition? I think that's important to really evaluate that and use examples or case points. If it's been thought of before, somebody's had that success. So just take that for what that is. I love this aspect. So this one may be controversial into nature, Eric, and I'd love your thought process on this next law of success from Napoleon, which is applied faith.
Okay.
So into my thoughts, I guess, is this faith in what you're doing is right, believing in yourself? Is this being positive? I mean, what are your thoughts on that success law of applied faith? What do you think he means by that?
Yeah, I'm throwing it out. I'm throwing this one out, Greg. And the reason I'm throwing this one out is you know what? To be cute is just unkind, but to be clear is both kind and effective. And so I just don't understand what Dave Ramsey wanted us to understand here when Napoleon Hill put this one out. And so I'm gonna throw this one out only because in a world full of evidence and hypothesis and a lot of ability to do research, what I want to do instead is make highly educated decisions. And I want to succeed in 1,000 parallel universes, not just one, because I had faith. I want to be successful every time because I do the right thing based on the facts and the due diligence that are available to me. And, I don't know that I will get a six pack if I eat kale chips and I get on the treadmill and do 8-minute abs with you, Greg. I don't know that I will look that with like
no one wants to eat the kale chips. I don't care what seasoning is on it. Let's just get rid of them. I can't do it.
But I believe that with the evidence that I have and the research that's been conducted, that I will get a six pack if that's what I did. Is that faith, or is it an evidence-based decision? I like to think that I'm making a decision based on evidence, not based on faith. Therefore, I'm moving forward with that one.
I like it. I would chalk that up for sure. I mean, in nature, the mindset process is crucial to continuation, but I don't think that's what Napoleon meant. So I would agree with you. I think that's a big thing to kind of have perspective on. So the next one is learning from adversity and defeat. And we've kind of talked about this a little bit too, failure and success and that sort of thing and what defines those. But learning from adversity, the tough times and or the losses, do you find that to be a core principle to be successful, is learning from those experiences?
Yeah, the only ones who don't are those that we call idiots. And I say that
nobody who's listening here, by the way.
And I say that because if you didn't learn from pain, then you should continue to put your hand on the hot stove as often as possible.
Well said.
The reality is that, again, I love that Napoleon Dynamite put this one together for us, but it's a little abstract, but fact. In fact, I just happened to be teaching some people in the company yesterday about how I view sales and the principle of really deconstructing every appointment after the appointment, or deconstructing every pain and every adversity or every micro failure, and understanding that it's pain plus reflection equals progress. Pain plus reflection equals progress. If we get pain without reflection, we don't get progress.
Wow.
we get pain again. So it only makes sense that that simple mathematical equation of pain plus reflection equals progress gets applied always and forever. And Napoleon Hill, I'm going to say that that's an effective principle.
Okay.
And we learned that as children.
Love it. If we had fancy editing with this show, I would say there'd be a green check, then you'd hear a ping that would pop up on here, not a with a red X. So we'll go ahead and just imagine that together as we're listening to this. So the next one, Eric, is which again you could give or take the opinion based off of this, and some people might feel one way or another about it. Having a pleasing personality, and to me, you kind of addressed it earlier into the nature that how I carry myself. I try to be positive in nature and to be, pleasant in my dealings with mankind, and it hasn't hurt me. And the people that I find that are a little turned off or put off by the fact that I seem to be relatively happy at any given time or positive, they're not my people. So I don't know what your thoughts on, is this a fundamental law of success? I mean, can you have success without being pleasant? I mean,
Sure.
Let's go there.
Is it a wise strategy? Probably not. Can you do it? Yeah, of course. I mean, I have no doubt. I don't know anything about the guy who created Minecraft. However, what I do know is that one dude effectively programmed and created the game Minecraft, and he had a lot of success behind a computer writing code. He could have had a great personality for all I know, but he could have had an incredibly abysmal and miserable personality. Therefore, yes, you can still be successful. Now, again, if I want to be successful in 1,000 parallel universes, I probably will be more successful by being someone who's pleasant to be around or who others enjoy their time with than the opposite. And therefore, it is a good strategy to apply that same principle and then pick and choose when you opt to be unpleasant based on the evidence.
Yeah, no, I think that's sound advice into that. I mean, and not that I'm an expert by any stretch of the imagination based off of this man's life, but from films and books and syndications, not to throw Steve Jobs under the bus, but there's several consistencies in nature to say that he really wasn't the most pleasant person on the planet. And yet, look what he was able to amass. And not just him as an individual, but obviously the totality, but not the most pleasant person. So I would agree. It's not a prerequisite or a law if you were to look at that into the stretch. But I don't know. If you have a determination to say, do I want to be a pleasant person or do I just want to be an asshole? I'd much rather just be that lighted side of a pleasant person. I mean, it's a conscious decision. I really feel that in nature. Everybody's got it every day. You got to wake up and do it if that's what you want.
Greg, when we look at some of the data, and I'm confident it likely still plays out this way. I haven't looked at it in a couple of years, but those that have the physicians who have the best bedside manner and are rated as the best bedside manner or the most likable by their patients are the ones sued for malpractice the least. Now, someone could make an argument that says, oh, well, that's maybe because they're better physicians. And yet that's an interesting causation line to try to draw. Something tells me that because they are more likable by their patients, they're less probable to be sued for malpractice than those who have lower bedside manner and who are more probable to be sued for malpractice. So it seems to play out with the data around lawsuit as well.
Well, and I like that mentality into nature. If you were to get onto the wrong side of somebody and something did go south, if you will, how is somebody going to react and treat to you based if, were you nice or were you not so nice to them? I think that there's repercussions. Some people would say you reap what you sow. When you're on top of the world, certain people can have personality traits to treat others however they see fit. But when things aren't going their way, people remember how you were treating them and how they felt during that process. And I don't think it serves anybody well under any circumstances to not have a pleasing personality, as Napoleon Hill says here, as one of the laws of success into that. So really interesting topic into that. What about the next one, Eric, which is personal initiative? So I guess really looking at it, the importance of, habits and taking charge, actually sticking through with what you have designed in nature. What are your thoughts on personal initiative?
Well, again, I mean, no one would argue that personal initiative is not a timeless principle. I love Gary. We were doing this event not recently at Mega Camp, and Gary came in and talked about hiring and what type of people he would want to be in business with, and it's funny, he gave the analogy of like, what I don't want to do every day is wake up and have to carry a tire pump throughout the office every day and pump you up. I gotta walk around and I've got to inflate every deflated tire in this place and motivate and inspire you to show up and do what you exchange your time for money. If I have to bring the tire pump to the office, then it's not going to be a successful relationship. And so, yes, personal initiative is a requirement. If anyone's ever been a teenage boy, you know that there are those that shower regularly and those that play video games and do not shower as regularly.
Shout out to my brother Sean if you're listening to this. He was on the ladder of the non-showering components, but he might still have that equation. So that's funny.
So absolutely, personal initiative wins out in the long run.
It's I love that you bring up the analogy of the pump and the tire, and as you're talking about this, Eric, it really brings home. This is not laws of success strictly for business, as to most people tuning into this would probably want to apply to their business and growth. This is so into every layer of life. I don't, again, just having that initiative into life to really be there as a present spouse, a father, a wife, whatever it ends up being into your life, a good friend. Taking initiative to really go after those things that matter to you and to your world, it's never going to serve you ill. And again, there's a lot of these things that are timeless in nature, and some need improvement and innovation. That's why we're here. Having creative vision. So that this is, to me, or correlating earlier, Eric, almost kind of general or generic into that nature. What are your thoughts on having creative vision to interpret success?
I think possibly I understand the intent here. I'm with you. It's potentially ambiguous and as a byproduct doesn't really give you tons of actionable advice. However, there are those that look for solutions, and then there are those that see problems. And typically the difference I find is a patterned way of thinking. And problem solving, which just so happens to be life and business, is overcoming challenges, problems, adversity. Typically, the most effective way to get through a problem is to go around the problem, to either prevent it or to then circumvent it. And the way to do that is by having creative vision. So it's then by thinking about that reflection process we talked about earlier, and understanding that, like, when I encounter a roadblock, will I take an alternate route, or will I stay stuck in traffic? Am I willing to accept that this is the best it can be and will be, or will I attempt to find a better way of doing this? And so with doing that, there is certainly a creativity component that comes into play. Okay. The question I always ask myself, funny enough, Greg, is whenever I get into some roadblock and I start to lose patience and I don't want to do something like, let's say I need to go renew the license plate on my truck. I mean, maybe I do. And so the question I will ask myself is, does Peyton Manning have to stand in line at the BMV? when living in Indiana, I can only assume that Peyton Manning is basically the de facto governor of the state, and that if he went to the BMV, he likely would not need to wait in line. And I'm not even convinced that he would go to the BMV. So if Peyton Manning doesn't have to go to the BMV, there's something that he knows that I don't know that would allow him to renew a vehicle, that if I knew how to do that, would mean that I also did not need to go through that exact same laborious, wasteful process of standing in line with a ticket in hand and getting and renewing a plate. Therefore, all I need to believe is that there is a solution. Now I've created the curiosity gap to try to creatively figure out what that solution is in order to close the gap between, does Peyton Manning stand in line in the BMV? And if Peyton does not, then why am I?
The way that you bridge that gap for creative vision, to me, it really articulates the thought process, is to be that natural, curious individual who's really thinking of things a little bit differently. And again, it's not just for the sake of the matter, hey, if Peyton Manning doesn't have to do it, why should I be doing it? Right. But at the same thought process, it is interesting to have the thought process, and this might kind of bring us back to a couple thoughts that Napoleon had into this list. But what was interesting, the quote that he has on this creative vision that's inside this is, all achievements, all earned riches have their beginning in an idea. So to me, what I'm basing off of vision and or creative vision is, you hear a lot of people say, Eric, you're thinking too small. Mm-hmm. You're not thinking big enough. You're not seeing down the road far enough. So I guess to me, when I think of vision or creative vision, what limitations are we putting on ourselves for our achievements? And how far can we see? And you and I have had conversations like this, and we talk about how far can we see and what does it look like short term. What adage do you use into that? It's not making long-term decisions on short-term feelings. Am I butchering that?
Yeah. So not making long-term decisions with short-term thinking. Okay. I like you hear these other timeless principles, Greg, like, don't go to bed after a fight upset with your wife. Mm-hmm. And that's probably good advice. Sure. And I could make the similar argument of, don't then wake up the next morning and file for divorce after you've had that argument with your wife. Mm-hmm. That is a long-term decision with short-term thinking. And so having the framework at all times of understanding the back of my head, hey, I'm thinking 10 years and in decades, not in years or in months. Therefore, if I'm thinking in decades, I make different decisions about possibilities, and I don't make short-term decisions.
I think that's great. And again, having the thought process and vision to do so and perspective, I think, is really kind of lining up with everything that's going here.
Dude, we apply this so much annoyingly that I joke that I plan to die in our house, but hopefully not anytime soon. And I say that, we bought this house, I don't know, 5 years ago, whatever it was, mm-hmm. and spent 7 months on the floor plan. Mm-hmm. Bought a house, didn't live there, spent 7 months on the floor plan because my intent was to think 5 decades in advance of how do we take time on the front end of ensuring that the floor plan is as timeless as humanly possible and as conducive for as many stages of living.
Wow.
So that whenever someone shows up and swings a hammer, it's got a long-term framework of thinking about how the house lays out through each of those 5 decades of forecasting, so that I don't need to pack another box and go into any other home if I don't choose. This house should accommodate us from start to finish.
Is that a skill or an ability that you have focused on, or is that something that you've always kind of had, Eric? And the reason why I ask is not everybody, or at least they make excuses, as is saying that most people can't think that far. They're not in complexity in nature to say, hey, this is the short-term, midterm, long-term effects based off the decisions, no matter how small or large. It seems like, again, to me, knowing you, that's a normal thing for you for all aspects. So is that something you're focusing on? Is it something that just comes natural to you because you've done it for what is it? I'm just curious for anybody out there trying to maybe work on it.
I remember Gary saying that vision is a skill. And I at first didn't quite understand that concept, but the reality of it is, Greg, I do believe that it's a skill that you acquire and that you continue to work on. And so to add a little color and backstory to that is that, I brought 8 builders and an architect in to walk the house and talk about a floor plan and provide estimates. So I didn't walk in with the long-term framework of exactly how that objective was going to play out. It's just that I aggregated enough information to say, okay, my hypothesis is that if I want to maximize the amount of money that I generate for a product, I want to have as many potential customers as humanly possible.
Wow.
If I can maximize demand, and I have limited supply, I will get maximum value from one of those parties that have demand. Therefore, how could I build a home that would capture maximum demand from as many diverse families or from as many diverse living situations possible, and simultaneously get 5 decades worth of life from me? So understanding then what's the objective first. What problem am I trying to solve for? I'm trying to solve for, if my plans don't go according to plan, how do I set myself up for the best possible outcome? And secondarily then is understanding, well, then what are my plans? What's my objective? What do I want to accomplish if everything goes really well? Marry the two together, bring in diverse perspectives, and then take action on whichever one seems, based on the aggregated perspectives, to make the most sense for the two objectives.
I think that's a perfect way to conduct yourself, throughout all decisions based into life. And it might not be the most spontaneous or compelling or attractive basis of living life, but however, you're going to mitigate a lot of the issues with just doing a little bit more due diligence, a little bit of processing preemptively than just knee-jerk decisions. And to me, there's a lot of failure based off of ill decisions, due diligence, and time frame, short-term, midterm, long-term. So I love how you're basing that, for me.
7 months of floor plan. And there's a lot of people who would have cut that process short. I have no doubt about it. And again, the thought that goes through my head is long-term decisions, short-term thinking. Best case scenario, if I shaved off 6 months of work on a floor plan that I was going to live in for 40 years, that makes me making long-term decisions with short-term thinking, because I should not be in a hurry and compromise on something that will have a multi-decade impact. You make quick decisions when, what do you want for lunch? When your wife's at the McDonald's drive-through.
Right.
That's short-term thinking, short-term impact. And so understanding the difference between those two decision-making frameworks allows for more effective long-range thinking.
Yeah, I love that perspective into it. It brings up that commercial, and I forgot what it's for, but it's quick decision in nature, but not putting much thought into it. I think it might be for beer or liquor or something like that. But it's a guy that goes into multiple situations of, what do you want for lunch? Oh, it doesn't matter. And it's some weird, thing for lunch. What kind of haircut do you want? Doesn't matter. And he comes up, it's just this crazy haircut. He's at a tattoo parlor. Hey, what do you want? Oh, whatever. It ends up being a unicorn with rainbows. I think having that thought process in nature, there's certain things that predicate or garner a little bit more of time and attention, due diligence. And to your point, there's certain things that can be a little bit more whimsical or organic. But I think you play that or wage that battle as you get to it and receive. I think that makes a lot of sense. When you talk about this core principle of success, or law, as Napoleon Hill has stated, a positive mental attitude. So, I mean, that goes into what I would think is to mindset, perspective. I think it, I mean, it kind of hits a little bit on the applied faith, maybe, may or not. I don't know what your thoughts on that, kind of looking at it from that perspective, a positive mental attitude as a law of success. What are your thoughts, Eric?
I'm struggling with this one. This one's a little too abstractly John Maxwellian for me, where it's like one of those.
Tell us more about your theory of John Maxwell.
John Maxwell is so good at saying things eloquently while saying nothing at all. And that's pretty much what this principle is, which is have a positive mental attitude. Positive attitude is just as infectious as a negative attitude, and all the more so.
Right.
Well, okay, great. So here's the interesting thing about that, though, Greg, which is when you're faced with making an investing decision or a business decision or a long-term decision, you should not go in with a positive attitude. You should understand how that decision will fail and the consequences of failure. And so you bring skepticism to the conversation, not optimism, when making long-range decisions. So I want to understand, what are the downside risks? Funny enough, Warren Buffett happens to agree with me on this, because his number one rule of investing is don't lose money. And then his number two rule of investing is don't forget the first rule. And so if I'm only ever optimistic about having a positive attitude about all things, I can only win at the casino in spite of what the odds tell me. It only makes sense to know the odds that I'm playing with by being objectively neutral, understanding the downside risks, and taking a positive attitude towards an evidence-based decision. But there's no need to uniformly have positive attitude amongst all things.
Well said. I agree. I think that's looking at it objectively and finding, the truth in the situation. Honestly, the downside. And look, there's so many entrepreneurs and professionals out there, business owners, real estate professionals, that are nonstop positive in nature, and to some, to the detriment to say, look, if they weren't a little off or a little crazy on the positive side, they probably wouldn't dive into a commission only, sort of scenario in the first place, right? It's always going to work out. It's always going to keep growing. But I agree with you. Looking at what is the true downside? What is the doomsday worst case scenario with this? And then pile all that other enthusiasm and positive nature into it, and see if you still come to that same conclusion. I think that's positive into the due diligence process. I appreciate you saying that and come from it. Is it a law or a law of success or rule into that? I disagree, and I think you and I are on the same boat.
Greg, there was my first or second year in real estate. It was the year I was asked to no longer be a Sherwin-Williams employee anymore. That year I'd made $435,000. Okay. And the year before, I think I'd made like $210,000. Now, mind you, I still have the last check that I got from that job, and it was, I believe it's like $39,000. So I'd made $39,000 that year before. I made $36,000, I think, when I started. I made $25,000 and the job before that, right? So I'm used to earning somewhere at that time between $25,000 and $40,000. Okay, that's my threshold and tolerance and temperature for the amount of income I get annually. Then all of a sudden I make $210,000 and $435,000, right? And so here's what I don't know. Well, here's what I didn't do is I didn't have a positive mental attitude about the income that I had earned and assume that I would always and forever earn that income. Instead, what I actually did, I didn't even cash the checks. They actually sat in the top drawer, left drawer of my desk at the office before I even cashed them. They piled up before I cashed them, because what I didn't what I didn't have was a business bank account, and two, what I didn't know is whether that was an isolated stroke of good luck, or if I had applied something that was repeatable and duplicatable. Mm. And so before I went out and spent any money, silly enough, I drove a Chrysler 300 at one time, and I think the payment was $350. And then I got a Cadillac CTS, and it was probably like somewhere in that $350 range. But for almost a year and a half, I looked for a new car, wanted a different vehicle. And I remember the payment on that new vehicle was $425 a month. So a whopping $75 a month difference between my $350 payment and the $425 that I ended up getting. But for 10 months, I looked because I wasn't comfortable spending the additional $75 a month because I wasn't yet convinced whether I had gotten lucky or whether I could repeat the success that I'd had the 2 years before. And so what did I do? I didn't have a positive mental attitude and assume blindly that luck would find me again moving forward. So instead, I went and I audited the last 25 years worth of real estate sales in Indianapolis and the top 50 agents in the city for 25 years consecutively. And I went through every single year, line by line, to look at the rankings of every agent. And what I found was, funny enough, there's a pattern. The people who are having success today were having success 10 years ago. And if they were doing it 25 years ago, they were in that top 50 as well. Based on that evidence, I would then decided, okay, I think I could buy this $425 a month car because those that figured out the principle of how to be successful and care for the customer in 10 years ago are still applying those principles today. I think I'm going to be okay. Wow. And so it's understanding that you just don't blindly apply positive mental optimism to all situations until you understand whether or not it's objective.
And I think that that's continually to core principles or laws of success into there. There's a lot of generalization into this list. And again, the fact that it is, back, out of 1928 understood into that nature, but it's really fascinating to get a window into your mind, Eric, and kind of how you think. And I think that more people, this is my perspective, need to take some tools out of your toolbox and really evaluate process and thinking and how they're positioning themselves in decision making, asking questions and being more inquisitive into why people are doing one thing versus why am I doing something else, or should I be doing something else? I think that it is important. And again, going to disruptance, kind of mantra and aspect. This is great stuff. The next one kind of bleeds into it. I don't even know if we want to address it, but it's talking about enthusiasm. So to be enthusiastic, I mean, what are the thought process into that? Again, it's kind of that positive mental attitude, glasses half full, having a level of energy. A lot of people will say that your energy introduces you before you even speak when you walk into a room. What are your thoughts on enthusiasm? Is it a law of success to be enthusiastic?
It's good advice. I mean, it's the same. You said it. It's the advice your grandma gave you.
Yeah.
She just didn't sell a book. It was glass half full. It was that your energy is infectious. When given the option of being enthusiastic or being miserable, one of them seems to be more sensible.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. That enough out of that category. So the next one, no disrespect, grandma, if that's the advice, sound advice, but let's get right down to the meat of it. This one, self-discipline. I mean, I'm a huge fan of this in success. I don't know anyone who's hit any level of success that is not disciplined in nature. How are you ever going to achieve anything if you're not self-disciplined? But what are your thoughts onto this adage, Eric? I mean, where do you go with this in advice for this being a law of success, being self-disciplined?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. There's a little bit of complexity around this, or a little bit of nuance in that. When I look at personality assessments and you see some some weaknesses that show up or opportunities for growth for me. Actually, self-discipline is actually one of the opportunities for me. That comes from being wildly ADHD. And so one of the things that shows up as a byproduct of that is can be like self-discipline or self-control or intention deficit, right? And so when I think about then this principle of self-discipline, I'm going to change the word slightly to call it consistency.
Oh, I love it.
Because discipline is certainly nothing that anyone looks forward to, right? Discipline is what happened when the teacher came by with a ruler and rapped you on the knuckles. And yet consistency is more critical than discipline. And so how you consistently achieve or take action upon the key drivers of life is less important than the fact that you consistently do the things that matter most. Do you do them in the same order every day? Do you do them in the exact same way? And I say that because when I finally came to that realization, it was liberating. And it was liberating because it was, if you hold yourself, some people I believe are highly disciplined, and that's their wiring. And then there are those that appear to be more disciplined outside looking in than they are. It's that they're consistent. And so consistency is more important than discipline.
Yeah, I think that's great. And flipping of words into that, discipline or consistency, it's all about, really making those habits and the positive choices, not the negative choices. I love what you're mentioning too, for me, it's not only taking those actions and being repeated, but I think giving it enough time too. There's so many individuals that start something and they just don't give it enough time to really let it turn into what it's supposed to do, to yield the result that's intended based off of the consistency or discipline that you're applying. I think that that's really important to note. Anybody in there, I think that checks a box. The green check with the tech, please, editor. I appreciate that. That'd be great. So I think this one is hugely a part of your life, Eric, into my perspective. When you look at it, accurate thinking or just thinking in general. So what are your thoughts on really looking to perspective and thinking things through? I mean, we've already addressed quite a bit of this, but is there anything that comes to mind from a critical standpoint for success to be thinking properly, to accurately be thinking about what you should be thinking about, how you should be thinking about it? What comes to mind?
Obviously, I can dig it, right? The show is disruptance, and so it's changed the way that you think, right? And here's the thought process with this, which is whenever someone internally in the organization comes to me and they bring me a problem, they bring the problem in a box, and it's got a wrapper on it, and it's got a cute little bow, and maybe it's got a name tag on it, and it's really been done up with all the emotion and all the fanciful ways in which people like to deliver problems. What I like to first understand is what are the facts and objective truths about what's inside of the box. Don't tell me about the box. The box frames the problem with the emotion. The box frames the truth with the emotion that someone brings. When we're able to separate the item that's in the box from the box, now we get to understand objectively which one is facts and information. And then when being able to isolate facts, information from the wrapper of emotion, I then get to take action on what's important and what's unimportant, what's urgent and what can wait. And once we can unwrap the box and get inside to understand the truth that lives inside of that fancy little wrapper, we can start to distill it to important and unimportant, urgent and timely, and then start to actually attack the item that is the objective truth inside of the box it came in.
I really like this formulation that you have here, Eric. And I mean, as far as leadership is concerned, you're on it. I mean, the way that you lead and execute by example, but then really have this this thought process in nature with team and organization is massive. But I want to ask you this, and this is on the personal note. I'm going to have to try this out into my personal life. Have you formulated this thought process as a father? Do you have an example where there was the emotion that was tied to it, that you had a distilled down conversation to get to the root cause?
Yeah.
And then you had some resolution. I mean, to me, from a dad to a dad, I'm interested. Anybody out there who's listening, I think, yes, as business professionals, entrepreneurs, we want to apply these principles, but hey, our life too. If we're having a conversation with our spouse, our child, like, we want to be able to break this down. Any thoughts on that? Any examples,
sure.
Eric?
Yeah. So this actually just happened Thursday or something last week. So my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, they were getting married on Friday, and their rehearsal dinner was Thursday evening, and it was at a church, and then we went to dinner, and Hudson hates more than anything to wear like dress clothes. For whatever reason, there is nothing that triggers nuclear war quite like Hudson wearing dress clothes.
That's awesome.
And so I don't know what I was doing, but I come upstairs, or I hear him and mom are they're in a battle over these dress clothes. And I know, and it's escalated to like, DEFCON 5. And so I walk in and I'm like, I tried to first understand and try to understand, like, what are the facts instead of what is the noise that's taking place in the room. Okay. So what are the facts? What are we objectively at a disagreement about? And then once understanding what the facts and information and the impasse was, then I went to validate his perspective and the way that he felt, and then went to try to then deconstruct or unwind by giving him additional validation to the facts. And so here's what this tangibly sounded like. So I walk in and he's like, I hate these clothes, right? I hate this. I have to wear these stupid clothes. I look so dumb and ugly, and people are going to laugh at me. And so this is what he says every time. It's hilarious. There actually are photos from our wedding where he's like covering his face, walking down the aisle, because he hated his wedding clothes so much. And so he's like, people are going to laugh at me. I hate these clothes. And these stupid people want me to wear them. Total 5-year-old, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, you hate these clothes and you don't want to wear them. No, I don't. They're stupid. And I look stupid. And I'm like, oh, you think you look stupid and you don't want to wear them, right? So I'm revalidating his statements to help to make the connection that I understand what he's telling me. And I understand and identify with his perspective. And I said, then take the perspective of, I want to move to his side of the conversation. For whatever reason, I see this as like two chess players looking down at a table, and right now we're across from each other in an adversarial role. I want to move beside him so that we're on the same team. Yep. So how do I get next to him in the conversation so that he thinks we have the same objective and the same level of understanding?
Perfect.
So my follow-up statement to him was, oh my gosh, you know what's so awesome is you don't want to wear clothes that other people want you to wear. You know how many people go through their whole life, Hudson, and do things for the validation of other people? And you don't want to do that. You don't actually care whether or not people like the clothes you wear. You wear them because you like your clothes.
Cool.
And in that moment, it's like game over. There was an understanding of being heard and understood, and in taking the perspective of trying to think about, how do I get to that side of the table, and then recognize the opposite of the way the emotion was being felt from the adult perspective, changed the entire dynamic of the conversation. Wow. Never again. We didn't talk about those clothes for the rest of the day. And so the thought process then with it is like being able to kind of like separate the layers of this Russian nesting doll of package to like, Okay, the noise when I walk in the room, then what's the impasse? Then what's the emotion that he's experiencing? And then how do I validate it and then get side by side so that there's a feeling of cooperation instead of controversy?
I love that. You take that one to the bank. That is huge, Eric. When you're talking about the basis, and that's why I really love this candid conversation in nature. That's what I love having these chats with you, and hopefully everybody in the audience appreciates it too. Is we don't know where these are going to go, but I think ultimately that applies to every relationship that we have, personal and professional, and taking that framework is massive. I'll report back to you on that, Eric. Olivia and I have many conversations as she is 5 years old, and these things do happen. It tends to happen a lot when she's tired, so I'll have to have the fatigue into the reasoning and conversation in nature. But I'm going to apply those principles, Eric, just so you know.
I give you too many books to read anyway, but I think as a parent, the overwhelmingly best book to read is How to Talk So That Kids Will Listen and How to Listen So That Kids Will Talk. And it is the best book on the planet as a parent of trying to really come up with the tactics and the strategies around how to effectively communicate on those like emotional impasse levels. There's even a how to talk so that little kids will listen and how to listen so that little kids will talk book. Both of them phenomenal.
And maybe that's an episode into the future, Eric, is utilizing that into the principles of talking to adults, using the core principles of talking with a child. Totally. That's good stuff in nature. So I know we're getting close here to the end. So this next one into nature is you're looking at it from a controlled attention. So I think this is based off of focus, right? I think the adage is, what we focus on is what we end up coming to fruition. What are your thoughts on, looking at it from paying attention, focus in nature? Is that just a dialed in note for a core principle of success?
Yeah, I mean, think of it a few different ways. Is wherever you are, be there and allocate your focus to precisely what you're doing at that exact time. And then when you're no longer doing that activity, no longer do that activity. Go then focus on whatever the next item you're going to tackle is. And so there's a couple different applications. One is be where you are. And then secondarily is understand that your focus is also limited. And as a byproduct of that, they claim that millionaires have 7 streams of income. And while that may be true, what it doesn't mean is go start 7 businesses tomorrow. The fallacy is believing that more businesses equal more income or more side hustles equals more income. The reality is focused execution on one highly asymmetrical business may be the best allocation of your time and of your money. And I think about it similarly of if I only had 20 minutes to go to the gym, it would only make sense that I would squat and deadlift and bench press and do those that gave me the highest asymmetrical return for my time in the gym compared to all of the other machines and pieces of equipment that are in the gym. So focus on those that give you the highest ROI. And as a byproduct, then once you've tapped out everything, then you get to move on to the next thing if you choose.
I think that's hitting it right on the head with the attention. And as you're mentioning, I think it was probably a Forbes article about 7 streams of income to the average millionaire, or wherever that comes from. I'm sure it's regurgitated everywhere. I don't know if you've seen the show, and I thought it was on HBO. It's called Wall Street. It's with Mark Wahlberg, so it's spelled like kind of with his name in there in nature. And why I mention that is because it's so genuine and honest as Hollywood could be, and a reality TV show could be. But what I love about that nature is exactly what you're saying. The way that Mark Wahlberg is portrayed with the 6 to 8 businesses, from film to fitness and all the different, alcoholic and apparel, whatever it ends up being. When he's in those moments, he's there. He's with the people, he's planning, he's executing, his attention to detail seems very, very laser focused. And then he moves on. So whether he's filming a movie or whether he's starting up a new, venture or a partnership through an apparel sort of scenario, it was very enlightening to see the portrayed reality of that, attention and the focus that's needed to have that success, not just in one venture, but a multitude. So I think that's if anybody's interested in watching that, shameless plug for Wall Street on HBO. I think they're on at least 2 or 3 seasons at this point. Teamwork. We're almost there, Eric. So teamwork as a law of success, and the thought process of no one gets there alone, right? That adage, and you and I have talked about this time and time again, but what are your thoughts on to achieve the high levels of success and it being a law? Is teamwork a fundamental?
I mean, I guess there's some nuance here to it, right? What are we like gonna go roll out the tarp for Fenway Park on a rain delay, and I need teamwork, or what am I doing? I think certainly it kind of applies to that principle of having having the mastermind component, and then also being someone who's likable and someone who brings enthusiasm. Certainly, when given the option of being a dick or being a good team member, it's probably more sensible to be a good team member.
For sure.
But there are plenty of people who are not great team members that are still able to have success. 1,000 parallel universes.
There you go.
Being a better team member wins 1,000 times.
Easy peasy. I love it. Check mark on that one, old Hill. So let's see. This is an interesting one. I think it gets kind of pushed by the side here quite a bit in nature, and it's a maintenance of sound health. So I guess fitness, internally wellness. I mean, so many professionals, entrepreneurs that they're so focused and driven on goals financially that a lot of their personal relationships and especially their personal health gets kind of put on the back burner. What are your thoughts on, this maintenance of sound health?
Well, certainly no one could argue that having unsound health is a great strategy. So when given the option of having John Maxwell's generalizations, I'm going to choose sound health again. But the hardest part here, Greg, is understanding the balance component of it, right? Is that, I always go back to, for whatever reason, this just really sticks with me. And I just I feel like sometimes I'm just like this, like sounding board and mouthpiece of Gary Keller. And I hate to sound like I'm parroting, but there's so much great wisdom. And, the quote that I think of and sticks out for me is that I can't have it all, be it all, or do it all. And the richest man in America can't pay the taxes for Rhode Island, the smallest state in the country. Wow. The wealthiest man in the world can't pay the taxes for the smallest state in America. Therefore, it's impossible to do everything, have everything, or be everything. Choose what you want most and go execute on that. And as a byproduct, of course, choosing sound health is sensible. The hardest part is trying to figure out the balance and allocation of time, given all of the many directions we're pulled on an ongoing basis. There's so many roles and so many jobs we all get, whether that's the job of spouse, partner, parent, grandparent, business owner, employee, leader, follower. We all get these jobs on an almost daily basis.
Sure.
The challenge becomes for most is trying to do everything and also include the health component. So it's overwhelmingly the most important. However, most of the time when we make poor health choices, we don't have an immediate consequence. Because there's no immediate consequence, we oftentimes believe that our actions are without consequence. Now, Greg, because you are diabetic, you likely don't have that permission and that ability to have no consequences with your health, right? Yeah. You get almost near-term consequences with the decisions that you make for your health. I, however, am able to make shit decisions with my health and not pay the price until later. I'm borrowing against it if I choose to make poor health decisions. So because of that, I think those that don't have near-term consequences don't realize that it has long-term impact.
And you bring up a really good point into there, because I think it's a prioritization. You're a productive guy. I'm a productive guy. We've got a lot of things going on in our lives, personally and professionally. When is it high enough priority into nature to say, look, I can carve 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour out of my day? Like, how busy, how full is your calendar to not do that? And when does it get to that point where it's not a priority? And I think you hit it right on the head. Unless if you're somebody in a situation who is somewhat forced to live a certain way, you're going to take the easier course of least resistance, which is to sleep in, right? To skip the gym, right? To eat the fast food instead of taking the time and an evaluation. So what is your thought process and perspective to honing in on, if you don't have a real health immediate reason, how do you then make it a priority for your health? To most people that are listening to this that don't fall into the odd category, what advice would you give to somebody to say, hey, like, you really should add this to a success law into your life, is to having sound health?
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you, it's something that I've found to be difficult at various intervals of business and life, and one of the challenges can be is that I think with health is it is either a mental standard that you hold of yourself, or you renegotiate with yourself. You're like one of two people. You either, that is a non-negotiable or it is a negotiable. For those that it's a negotiable, then you have to really start to insulate yourself with some of the principles that we talked about previously 3 episodes ago, where it's like you need then to have a really clear plan. You need to have then the visuals. You have to have a network that reinforces that decision and that prioritization. And so for those that negotiate with their health as a byproduct of who they are, then the challenge can be is figuring out what is the system for social engineering the outcome. It is, it is not as easy as it can actually be as easy as just making a decision and then never negotiating. However, until you get to that point, it's typically some form of social engineering that corresponds with that decision. And it might be you set your alarm clock in another room, you have some sort of consequence that takes place if you hit the snooze button. And my wife will tell you that hilariously, if she hit the snooze button, it would send a text message to Adam Hergenrother that said, hey, just want to let you know I'm sleeping on my dreams today. And
oh, I love that, Eric. This is great.
So you're like building in these barriers of pre-deciding the behavior in advance.
Wow.
And ensuring that you optimize the system for the desired outcome by being proactive about what will likely get in the way. Or what I like, I just had one of the teams within the company do a failure pre-mortem last week. And, so that's going through the process of, okay, we failed. Now here we are, we're 12 months down the line, 6 months from now. And we said, okay, we set out with this goal and we failed. Now let's map out everything that went wrong in the future us that caused us to fail, so that we're aware of all of those potential causes of failure before we ever set out on this voyage. And so understanding that's probably the most effective way to build a habit is to think about the pre-mortem prior to mapping out the way to make it successful.
Wow. I love this. And again, this is speaking to so many people out there, and not to pinpoint that, but I think it is a fundamental. Our body's the vessel that brings us through this life. And it's the fact, why not take care of it? Why not show up?
And we've talked about it before. I look at this like the goal is health span, not lifespan. the goal is to have as enjoyable of a healthy, long life as possible. It's not to live as long as possible.
Well said.
Because living as long as possible miserably is not a desirable choice for most of us. Most of us would prefer to live of optimal health and mobility as long as possible. Therefore, if there are any ways to gain additional health span, whether that's through preventative surgeries or retroactive care, or any ways to gain back some of that health span, I'm in favor of it, assuming that it's done under, great guidance and supervision and, all those disclaimers and whatnot. But
Perfect.
There's a lot of ways to take action. If someone's late to prioritizing health, there still are things that can be done to increase mobility and increase health span.
No, this is good stuff. And I know there's somebody who's tuning into this that needs to hear this. So once again, you're welcome. This is the last one, Eric, on the list here. And we can wrap this episode of Disruptance up for sure. It is budgeting of time and money. So, that seems pretty self-explanatory as time management, expectations, prioritization, and not being a fool with your money. I think that's fundamental, but what are your takes on budgeting of time and money as a law of success?
I'm going to throw this Dave Ramsey principle away. And, here's my thought with this.
Yeah.
And both Napoleon Hill and Dave Ramsey are going to hit the unsubscribe button. So here's
That's
why.
All right. We'll survive, Eric.
94% of people who have a budget live paycheck to paycheck. So if budgeting were the answer to becoming wealthy, why are so few people who budget actually wealthy?
There you go.
Budgeting puts us in this place of thinking from a deficit oftentimes. And, I've controversially said, and to the surprise and dismay of so many, that people think that I'm like the P&L guy because I, for whatever reason, can read and understand them well, that I'm both a champion for P&Ls and income statements, balance statements. And the reality is as a business owner, I'm just not. For most small to mid-sized businesses, what you likely don't need is a rear view mirror look back at your business in the past. What you likely need is to look at your cash flow and to understand, when I go to the drive-thru at Starbucks, can I get this double mocha venti chai oat milk latte?
That makes me thirsty, Eric.
And so budgeting puts me in this place of trying to ration everything. Not a bad strategy. If fundamentally I literally have to ration because I will be at the very end of my dollars at the end of the week. I've been there, by the way. And what I would change in the concept of budgeting is understanding discretionary spending and necessary spending. And then understanding is sometimes what you cannot do is cut coffee on the path to building wealth. What you need is to make more money, not to save more trips to Burger King. Unless you have a really egregious fast food habit, there's a high probability that the most costly thing you're doing is working a job that doesn't pay you or not doing the things that pay you the most. Typically, the fix is earning more and being conscious of discretionary spending and always trying to get a little bit better with discretionary spending on an ongoing basis, understanding then what's discretionary, what's necessary, and not negotiating between the two.
As you mentioned this, Eric, and I think this is going to be an incredible episode, later on through Disruptions to dive deeper into the wealth aspect and wealth building and misnomers that's associated with it. You had mentioned something that triggered a thought. It's kind of that old adage, the best defense is a good offense. And I think attacking and not retreating, I think, is one way to really build that out. So ultimately, I think that's going to be a phenomenal episode in the future. I want to get your take on this, and we'll wrap this up. Did Napoleon Hill's 16 Laws of Success from 1937 hold up, Eric? What's your thoughts overall? Did it hold up? Did it not?
We've got more yeses than we have nos on this paper, but I think Napoleon Hill took a really great strategy with this, which is when you want to sell personal growth books, the number one best strategy is to be as ambiguously broad as possible.
There you go.
Because no one can argue against a stitch in time saves 9, and the early bird gets the worm, and that you attract more flies to honey than vinegar.
Ooh,
all right,
this
Greg?
is good. Pearls of wisdom here. I love it.
I'm ready to go public with my book.
Here it comes. You heard it first, everybody. No, Eric, you're right. You're spot on with this. But that's why everybody is here, myself included, tuning into these thought processes and really reshaping and rethinking the way that life and business can be conducted, and disrupt the way that entrepreneurs and business professionals are thinking and running. So, absolute pleasure as always, my friend. Tons of information to assimilate and really break down as always. Man, I loved it. This was fantastic.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you as always. And one thing I just thought the audience could take away from this, from a marketing standpoint,
love it.
One of those really effective strategies, right? 17 laws. Isn't that like a psychology hack of thinking about it as like when you number things, and then when you call them principles or laws or keys or strategies, you hook the audience to want to know more and sell more copies.
Another great episode that we need to talk about too is how to position, posturing for position, perception is reality. There's so many different things from a marketing perspective. And most people are doing that incorrectly, Eric. So I just love this, my friend. And as always, I appreciate your